Hi, my name is Delano Capobianco, and today I'm your instructor for the 1960s counterculture, and I'll be teaching you about the general aspect of the 1960s counterculture and specific topics. To start off with, I'm just going to talk about the general aspect, and 1960s counterculture was a huge part of the American history because it was a huge change for teenagers and young adults and children. It was their time that they wanted to create their own generation and own era instead of follow their parents and their older generation. They wanted to do new things. To start off with, you could say the hippies, the hippie movement. Teens rebelled against their parents, did everything, and they loved the outdoors. They thought that utopia was from outdoors, the natures. They loved it. They wanted to just listen to music, test out drugs, and live outside in nature. And same with environmentalism. People just loved the environment. They wanted to create a new world. They wanted to have eco-everything. And as you can tell now, we're trying to get that, but it's not working that well. Our world is a lot of CO2 and everything in the air. But otherwise, that going back to women's liberation, women started to rebel, which was huge. That because ever since after the Vietnam War and after World War II and everything, the rights for women started to get better and better until the 1960s, when it really came into action, when women wanted to really rebel and get their own freedom and get better jobs like white collars compared to blue collars. Now moving on to gay rights. Gay rights was also a huge part of the American history in the 1960s counterculture because a lot more people started coming out of the closet, and it was just big because gay people, there really wasn't that many gay people back then. It never was accepted. People always said that you had to marry a woman, and men had to marry women, women had to marry a man. And not till 1960s, a lot more people started coming out, and it showed that it really didn't matter. It was more of that if you wanted to marry a guy, wanted to marry a guy, it's okay. If a woman wanted to marry women, that's okay. And if a man wanted to marry a woman and a woman wanted to marry a man, it was alright. It was what you picked. It wasn't really what other people said you had to do. It was more of what you wanted to do. And also a huge thing. Now we're going to go into detail about each topic we discussed earlier in the aspect of the 1960s counterculture. Now we're going to actually specify each detail instead of just giving a short description as we did earlier. And to start off with, I'm going to talk about environmentalism, which was huge in the 1960s, and that the thing that really sprung it was the book that Rachel Carson's published, Silent Spring, in 1962. Was really, it pointed out that a lot of chemicals, like chemical pesticides, were put into the air and just put out there, like DDT, and this really scared people. And people started to worry about all the chemicals that are getting put into our air, like from automobiles, industries, oil spills, and people were really concerned about their health, which really scared them, which is why that people started to change, want to be more eco, be environmentalist, and hippies really got influenced by it, and that really, it was a huge factor of the 1960s counterculture because it changed that whole era and that whole decade and that whole time to now. Like, as you look at it, we have hybrids, we have green lights, we have recycling, we have, I don't even know, a lot of things that help the environment that we never did before. And this is why that it started, is because of the 1960s. However, in 1970, Congress suspended the Clean Act of 1967 to develop uniform national air quality standards. It also passed the Water Quality Improvement Act to help offshore oil spills be the responsibility of the pollutant. Also, a thing that occurs now and day, and we still do to this day, is Earth Day. Earth Day originated in April 22nd, 1970, and it was the first day that people ever really could say thank the earth and clean the earth, and that schools and communities across the nation on April 22nd decided, hey, we should have an Earth Day. And now ever since, April 22nd is the day that we celebrate Earth. And that's kind of environmentalism over the 1960s counterculture. And now I'm going to move into drugs. Now I'm going to move on to drugs. And one of the big drugs in the 1960s was LSD, which stands for lysergic acid dithylamide, which is a semi-synthetic psychedelic drug, which is also known as acid. And some huge symptoms or things that can happen when you take LSD is you have a very weird thinking process. You can have open or closed vision problems. You can also have loss of time and spiritual experiences. And this drug was extremely well known for this time, and other things that it was known for was as an entheogen or recreational drug, and it is also used as an agent in psychedelic therapy.
For the next part, we'll be talking about hippie and hippie music, or otherwise known as psychedelic rock. But we'll start with hippies. Hippies were people who were all about the environment, and they believed in free love. They believed that men could marry men and women could marry women, and they didn't really care. And they were not part of the social mainstream. They were kind of the outcasts of social mainstream. And so they wore clothes that were supposed to express themselves, such as short-sleeved shirts, and sometimes women went naked or only wore no makeup. Hippies lived in their own community and also listened to their own type of music, also known as psychedelic rock. Psychedelic rock was where the music had meaning to it, and during this time the Vietnam War was going on, and hippies were all against the Vietnam War. So artists such as the Beatles, which was known as the British Invasion time, had meaning in their song, saying that they didn't want war in Vietnam, and they wanted the troops back in the U.S.
Good afternoon, class. My name is Mr. Regis, and today's lesson is women's liberation. And women's liberation began in the mid-1960s, and almost half a century after women won the right to vote, women's activism joined the explosion of civil rights, anti-war, and student movements, and women began to overturn discriminatory laws through legislation and court action, and this broke new ground for women by entering male-dominated professions. This context for the disruption of activism was a massive shift in women's economic roles after World War II, because married women began to work in the labor force, and started declining birth rates, and middle-class lifestyles required dual incomes, and while educational opportunities led more and more women for more successful futures, and the defining moments of this movement were multiple. An example was in 1966, the National Organization for Women organized to work through the legal system to overturn discriminatory laws. And a year later, students made women's liberation, which was a lot bigger than women's suffrage, because women's suffrage just wanted to cover one point, while women's liberation wanted to cover a ton of points, and women's liberation was a lot bigger than women's suffrage, because it wanted to make women equal to men, while women's suffrage just wanted to cover one point at a time.
Yeah.
Hello class, I'm Mr. Regis, and today I'll be presenting to you all about the 1960s gay rights. It was a movement developed post-World War II, and in the group they were seeking social acceptance and equality. There were many homophile groups in the 50s, and they were non-confrontational, so they didn't have much success with their gay rights movement. But then there was the gay rights movement of the 60s, and they did have a radical approach for acceptance, with both protests and just parades, whatever they may have. And that led to the Stonewall Inn, which is a specific case I'd like to talk about. It was a gay bar within the Stonewall Inn, and there were just police that raided in. And then there was a 3-night scandal between the gays and the police. And that really fueled the gay rights movement of the 60s to keep pushing for the rights that they felt they deserved, for acceptance and equality in the United States. Thank you, class, for that very brief lesson. I hope you can take something from that. And Mr. Regis, and I'm done here. Hello, I'm Mr. Regis, and today I plan on instructing you all about the 1960s slang and compared to modern day slang that all the kids and teenagers are talking about today. So, to get us started, let's have a fun activity where a volunteer from our class could just come up and try and guess what these slang terms mean. So who would that be?
Me.
We have a volunteer. Come on up. Come on up and just guess what they are. Good luck. Ooh. I think that was pretty good. So we have BA, and Delano thought it was a bad person, but from the 60s slang, that actually referred to a bare bottom or bare butt. And bitchin', modern day is, yes, is complaining, but from the 60s, it actually referred to a cool person. And cherry, Delano thought it was look good. And that is actually pretty much accurate. It means like pristine or mint condition. And chrome dome is a head of hair. Pretty close, but chrome dome is actually referred to a bald person. So you had the right idea there. A ditz is actually an idiot. So crazy idiot. I guess you got that one. A dude was referred to as cool, but actually in the 60s it's a geek. So, quite the change from the 60s to modern day slang. A gas was referred to as speed, according to Delano, and in reality it's having a lot of fun from the 60s slang. And to be square is to be uncool, and it's a shape, yes, so I'll give you some credit there. A flower child is referred to as a hippie from the 60s. A fag is referred to as a cigarette, and modern day is a homosexual. Moo juice is considered milk from the 60s. A rap, again, get on my lesson plan here, is actually to talk, just in normal conversation. And fuzz was referred to as the police, and loaded was actually referred to as intoxicated or drunk from the 60s. And now, I have a fun quiz on the back. Go on, let me spin this around real quick. Push it. Push it. There we go. So, modern day slang that was also used in the 60s. So, Delano, how about, I'll just throw these out there. Tell me what they mean. Should you know? Attractive girl. There you go. How about to crash?
Fall asleep.
To be clean?
Full of fresh.
Beautiful. Bread.
Money.
We have shades.
Sunglasses.
How about fresh?
Full of good.
Fresh pair of shades. So, now we have completed our slang lesson. Fun activity we have from the 1960s counterculture, referring to that. And that concludes today's lesson. I'm Mr. Regis, and I hope you enjoyed.